I am a fertility educator and a cycle coach, so this means I love to help educate women about their bodies, and I teach a fertility awareness method for tracking your cycles, to get diagnosed, or to use it as birth control. And I just love spreading information for women to learn about their bodies, to learn about different options that they have with birth control, especially non-hormonal options. My business is called Know Your Cycle. I do one-on-one sessions, and I love doing these videos for free on YouTube. If you'd like to do a one-on-one session with me, check out the link in my description. It's just $35, and it's whatever you need, whether you want information about using it as a natural birth control method, or you're trying to figure out your painful periods, anything cycle related, I would love to help you with. I'm going to teach you a little bit about natural forms of birth control today. We're going to be talking about the effectiveness of different methods based off of a couple different groups. So we're going to be talking about barrier methods, we're going to be talking about fertility awareness methods, as well as just some that don't fall into a clean category, and some combination methods. I'm going to be talking about the pros and the cons, and when certain birth controls might not be a good idea, and instances where it might be a better idea for you, so that you can find what works for you, something that is effective and something that is achievable for you. I know some of you really want to choose a method that is non-hormonal, so if that's the case, this video is for you. So we're going to start off with talking about barrier methods. This is probably one of the most common methods when you think about a natural method. You think of things like condoms, diaphragms, and cervical caps. I'm going to be hitting on those three. There are a couple of other methods, such as like the female condom, but they all kind of follow similar numbers. And I'm especially going to spend more time on the ones that have higher effectiveness. So we'll start with talking about condoms. This is probably what most people are kind of used to hearing about. For condoms, the typical use is 87%. So that would be if maybe you don't use it consistently, like sometimes you don't use it. This would be if you're not using the right size. So typical use doesn't necessarily mean like this is what most people do. Typical use is just not perfect use. So perfect use is if you're using it every single time, you are using the right size, you are using it for the entirety, you're using a new one every time. These kind of things are necessary for it to be considered perfect use. And perfect use puts it at a 98% effectiveness, which is quite high and very comparable to hormonal birth controls. Another thing that you can think about that we will be talking about throughout the video is combination methods. So if you wanted to use something like a condom, pairing it with something like a spermicide may be a good idea. Just make sure you're paying attention to whether or not the condoms are able to be used with whatever type of lubricant you're looking at, because that is important too when we're looking at the effectiveness of it. So moving on to the diaphragm. So a diaphragm is something that you're going to have to go and kind of get fitted for. You're going to need a prescription for it because it needs to fit you properly. This is going in the woman, so it's really important, just like condoms, that it fits. The typical use for the diaphragm can really range between 71 and 88%, which is kind of on the low end. Perfect use brings it up to the 92 to 96% range. Perfect use would involve using it every time, of course, having the proper size, putting it in before sex, using it with spermicide, and leaving it in for 6 hours after. Now moving on to the cervical cap. Again, this is something that's going inside the woman. Typical use again is 71 to 88%. Perfect use goes up to 96%. Now the important thing to know about the cervical cap is the effectiveness is going to be lower if you have had a baby. So for women who have never had a baby, the effectiveness with typical use is more like 88%. Whereas if you've had a baby before or multiple babies, it's on the lower end, more like 71%. This is because that cervical cap is on the cervix, and the cervix can be a little different in women who have given birth. Similar to the diaphragm, it's kind of got the same perfect use requirements. So you have to put it in before, You have to leave it in for 6 hours after. You want to use it with spermicide. All of those same things apply for this cervical cap. Let's move on to fertility awareness methods. Fertility awareness methods refers to methods that are using observations that you're making and different tools that you're using to just track your body to figure out where you're at in your cycle and use that information to know when to abstain or when to use other methods and when you're okay to go unprotected. Of course, this is going to be more for people who are in a committed relationship, maybe you're married, and you're not worried about things like STDs. I'm going to start off with addressing the method that is really not reliable and may be why you have a little bit of mistrust for this form of birth control, and that is the calendar method, also known as the rhythm method. This is simply a calculation, which is why it's just not super accurate, because as women, we are individuals and our cycles change. Even if you do have really regular cycles, there are plenty of reasons why ovulation could just be delayed. If you are under a lot of stress or sick at the right time, it could delay ovulation, which could throw off the whole calculation. It's a calculation based off of when your last period was and using when most women ovulate. There's not even a really good typical use number for this because it's just all over the place and not great. Perfect use, of course, can be kind of high, but that's really only if you're lucky. There's just no good science behind this, which is why I just don't recommend it. I just want to address it. Now, moving on to a little bit more of a reliable fertility awareness method, but still not something that's super reliable and super effective, and that is temperature only. Now, something that falls under this is natural cycles. If you're in this space of looking for non-hormonal birth control, then you've probably seen ads for natural cycles. So it's basically just taking your temperature every single morning, and the algorithm kind of comes up with the days that you're safe and the days that you're not. The reason why I don't recommend this as the only thing that you do is because temperature is great for confirming ovulation. This is because your temperature rises when your progesterone rises. It has a warming effect on your body. After ovulation has occurred, our body produces progesterone. So once our temperature rises and stays high, we know ovulation has happened. Our egg only lives for about 24 hours. If we calculate a window of time to make sure that egg is gone, then we know, okay, I've ovulated, the egg is not there, I'm not fertile. So temperature is good for that second half of our cycle, but it is not reliable for the first half of our cycle. This is an issue that you run into with a lot of these methods. There is no way of knowing if you're gonna ovulate sooner than you would normally or later than you would normally. And when you're only using temperature, it gives you no indication of what is happening during that first part of your cycle. You could be ovulating 10 days earlier than normal and not even know it. Again, it's telling you if you have ovulated, but before then, you have nothing. So it's only using an algorithm to know if you're safe or not during that first part of your cycle, the follicular part of your cycle. This is why I just don't recommend this as the only method. I think it's a great method for helping you to confirm ovulation, but otherwise it's kind of a gamble. And it's that first part of your cycle that's really important because sperm can survive for up to 5 days. So that's why we really have to be careful when looking at these methods. Again, there's kind of a varying range of typical use that it's hard to even find a number, but the perfect use can be up to 98% with temperature. But again, it's kind of only if you're lucky. There's a lot that could affect this. If you want to ease into fertility awareness methods and you want to keep using maybe a barrier method, starting out with temperature would be a great way to start implementing these habits without it seeming like a lot. Moving up again, we'll look at methods that use cervical mucus only. This includes Billings method, Creighton, Femme, to name a few. So basically these are fertility awareness methods that teach how to observe your cervical fluid observations to know whether or not you are fertile. This has a lot higher efficacy than just temperature alone, and this is because we are observing in real time what our body is doing. Our cervical fluid is reflecting the hormonal changes that are happening that day. You can know by the cervical fluid you're observing if, for instance, estrogen is rising, or if estrogen is high, or if estrogen is low and progesterone is high. So that is how we can know, even in the beginning of our cycle, if we're fertile or not. Because if we've got cervical fluid there that the sperm could survive for up to 5 days in, then we know that it's not safe. However, if there is no cervical fluid, then we know that we are safe. So FEM is actually where I did my training through, and this is kind of a mucus only, but it also involves LH testing. So if you've heard of like ovulation test or LH test, that's another way to kind of confirm that ovulation is going to happen. You start taking those tests when you start seeing that fertile cervical fluid, and you take it until you get a positive, and then that would indicate that you're going to ovulate within 24 to 36 hours. Finally, we look at fertility awareness method that groups them all together: cervical fluid observations and temperature, and even optional LH testing or hormonal testing. So this would be referring to symptothermal methods, something like SensiPlan, taking charge of your fertility. If you've read that book, that's kind of its own method, and SymptoPro. Again, these are all different methods. They have like slightly different rules, but it's all looking at the same general thing. You're combining both taking your temperature every morning with cervical fluid observations. If maybe your temperature was disturbed based off of not getting enough sleep, then you can also be using that extra cervical fluid to make sure, okay, yes, this looks right. And it just helps you so that you can choose the more conservative, like, okay, maybe temperature is saying that we're good to go, but cervical fluid is saying that we need to wait 2 more days. And it gives you the most conservative fertile window, so you can know and really feel confident that you are safe, or that you are, in fact, where you think you are in your cycle. And the nice thing about this method is that it also gives you insight into your health, because it can start to uncover underlying issues. You might notice that you could have high estrogen, for example, or low progesterone. I really, really love fertility awareness methods for this fact, and that's why I teach a lot about it, because not only is it a great tool for avoiding pregnancy and achieving pregnancy, but it also gives you so much insight into your cycle health. So that is all for the fertility awareness methods. Moving on to the copper IUD. Now the IUD is inserted into the uterus. It's not hormonal, so it's not disrupting the ovulation pattern, which is really great. And I know if you're watching this video, it's because you don't want to do the hormonal route, or you're looking for different options that wouldn't involve hormonal birth control. The great thing about the copper IUD is its efficacy. It really is very effective. It is 99% effective at preventing pregnancy, and there's just really no upkeep that you have to worry about. It's not something you have to do every single day. So if you're the kind of person who really, maybe you don't have a routine, maybe your job has you kind of all over the place, or you have a lot of kids, or there's something that just makes it hard for you to remember to do something like at the same time every day, this could be a really good option for you. The major way that the copper IUD works is that it really affects the way that sperm is able to move, so they're not able to move to even get to the egg. And it can also cause some changes with cervical fluid, as well as the uterine lining, to not make it a space for pregnancy to even take place. So all of these like kind of different ways that the copper IUD is able to work to prevent pregnancy from happening is kind of how the efficacy is so high. To the cons, the inflammation is a concern, especially for women who have a history of heavy cycles, fibroids, pelvic inflammatory disease. If you already have issues with high copper, because of course you're putting copper right inside your body, so if you already are having issues with that, then this is not for you. There's just a higher risk for you. One of the side effects can be a heavier period. So if you're already having issues with heavy periods, it's really not recommended. And just thinking about how it works, that it causes inflammation. If you're just kind of having inflammatory issues already, it just may not be a great idea. Now, don't let that scare you too much. My heart is just to inform you, and I want you to know that there are side effects. Even though this is not hormonal, there still are concerns with the IUD. Not to mention I'm sure you've heard it can be pretty painful to get the IUD inserted and taken out. And there is, of course, the risk of it migrating. This isn't like a huge risk. It's not like 99 out of 100 women have this issue, but it is something that could happen. So that's kind of the copper IUD. Again, out of all of these methods, this one pretty much has the least amount of upkeep and may be a good option for you if you just don't have the time or the energy to keep up with something that you have to do every single day or every single time. Now on to kind of the other methods that kind of don't fall under just one. So spermicides, withdrawal method, and just the idea of combining different things. We kind of talked about spermicides with the cervical cap and the diaphragm. So this is a great thing to use with other methods, but on its own it is about 79% effective, so not really great, but a good thing to use with other methods just to further increase the effectiveness. If you are really sensitive, there is that concern that spermicidal lubricants just may not agree with you, but this is just something to think about, another thing, another option. Withdrawal, again, that's something that effectiveness can really vary, and I'm sure you've heard like, don't use this as your form of birth control. It is something that you could do in combination with one of the other methods, like a barrier method, but the effectiveness of that alone is not great and would not be recommended. I hope this video was very helpful for you and informative, and if there is anything that you would like me to cover in these videos, I would love if you would leave a comment below. Thank you so much